so we're excited to get our presentation kicked off. Just a word about WPA's Work in People Analytics, which is leading organizational intelligence about a company's unique work, its people, its behaviors, culture, and the relationships that create value and success. A robust, cloud-based software as a service toolbox, WPA provides leaders with clarity and evidence for decision making regarding optimizing their human capital, closing the strategy execution gap, engagement, productivity, and more. There's really nothing else like it. Deep insight that's easy, actionable, and cost effective. WPA North America is now holding this series of short and informative webinars, 30 minutes. We're going to try to keep these to. We're going to do them once a month, and I think generally speaking on the third Thursday of the month. And hopefully these are topics of interest to you and how Work in People Analytics provides solutions to organizations. Be sure to sign up for the entire series. You can see there on your screen that the next couple of presentations will be July 20th and August 17th, and then September 21st as well. After today's presentation from Kevin, we'll take questions, of course, and look forward to those. At the conclusion, there'll be a short 2-question survey. We'd appreciate your feedback. So with all of that said, let's get started. To introduce myself, I'm Tom West. I work with WPA conducting our training and certification programs as well as supporting our North American partnerships. Stephen Smith, who you see there on the screen also with WPA, is on the presentation too. He'll be fielding our questions that are submitted from participants. Stephen's an industrial organizational psychologist with a Fortune 500 HR and analytics background. And I'm happy to work with and introduce Kevin Schlater, who is president of WPA North America and part of the global WPA team. Kevin has more than 25 years of experience in corporate financial performance, organizational leadership, and strategic planning. So with all of that said, Kevin, I will turn it over to you and let's get started.
Thank you, Tom. We look forward to sharing with everyone because this is a topic that is dear to our heart, but most importantly, it's critical to the function of the enterprises and the organizations out in the world today. And so we're going to kick ourselves off here this morning with a quick poll question that Stephen's going to distribute to everyone. And that poll question should be going out, and it'll give everybody just a moment to respond to that poll. What we're really trying to find out in the poll question is understanding kind of the time that you spend and the energy that's spent corresponding on a daily basis.
And Kevin, if I'm not mistaken, you're going to talk an awful lot about work behaviors and work activities, and this is one of them that is significant.
That's right.
So we'll leave that open for just a moment. Please respond. Simple question. What percentage of your time approximately each week do you spend on corresponding?
Okay, it looks like everything's coming in, and it looks like the responses are somewhere around better than half spend more than 30% of their time in correspondence during a given week. And of course, that varies from time to time and day to day, depending on what the activities that we're doing. This is a very human thing, the amount of correspondence that we do in these organizations. And we're going to come back to that correspondence behavior in just a little bit. But first, we're going to step through strategies and tie that back to behaviors, and then share the case studies that we want to put in front of you here this afternoon, or this morning, excuse me.
So we've closed that poll question now, and let's go back to your presentation slides. Wonderful.
70% of CEOs believe that their organizations aren't prepared to execute key strategies, and so much is written about the inability for organizations to execute on key strategies or their inability to react to marketplace changes. And this is only getting harder because the world's moving so fast. in terms of globalization, technologies, and new competitors that enter your marketplace and our marketplace every day. This particular study and this finding came directly from the 2016 PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers Global Executive Survey. HBR, Boston Consulting, McKinsey, and so many others do similar studies to these, and they have found largely exactly the same findings. Common strategic initiatives normally nowadays relate to things like financial growth, innovation, improving that client experience and transformation, and these are pretty heady initiatives when you really think about strategies, vision, and purpose of an organization. But the big point from this slide is probably this: the inability to achieve on the things that an organization wants to accomplish is a huge issue. And while there's all kinds of reasons for this that we can't cover here in a half-hour webinar, it's clear that there's a pretty big disconnect between the ideas of strategy and the ability to carry them through. In fact, a lot has been written about we've gotten so good at developing strategies or purpose or vision and or ideas, whatever you want to call them. That's not the hard part anymore. The hard part is giving it to the people in the organization to execute. An alignment of teams to those strategies sounds pretty obvious and simple, but it's really rarely done. So it highlights the real problem that organizations and C-suite leaders constantly talk about in various ways, but this is really the problem. This is about our own experience. This is about your own experience, excuse me. Is this what your experience is like? This is what it's been like for me. In my 30 years of professional life, I've gone through 4 or 5 different intensive strategic planning sessions and deployed those out to the organizations. And in every one of those cases, those failed or didn't achieve the outcomes that they were supposed to. So where organizations have these lofty goals and aspirations and they're well communicated, but that's about it. We never really do the hard work of connecting that vision and those strategies down to the behaviors that it's going to take to bring them to life. So here's the central point, and here's our challenge. We need to understand and measure the readiness of our teams to execute what we need them to do. So if I was to ask most strategic planning committees or people that work on the purpose and vision of the organization to do one more thing, it would be this: take every strategy, every initiative, every idea, and now reconcile that to the people in your organization that are going to carry it out and identify exactly how they need to change their behaviors to carry it out, or identify that they do have the behaviors that are capable of carrying that out. There's the disconnect, because developing these strategies is very intensive and very difficult, but we have to take one step further. And that's where we see at Work and People Analytics, there's a big connection point and a big opportunity. We need to understand the capability and capacity of our teams to execute on these key strategies that are right in front of them. And quite frankly, if we don't understand if they're capable of doing that, we're doing them and everyone a disservice, because investment dollars are going to go in the wrong place and things aren't going to get executed. In order to understand our ability to achieve our goals and to create success, we have to start with the how. And here's the how. So how are we going to achieve these? And Simon Sinek, who's quite famous for saying, hey, start with why. Everyone has to start with why. That is intelligent, and it's very important from the communication aspect. But when the rubber meets the road, down to the frontline teams, the frontline managers, and the people that are going to do the work, we need to understand, we need to start with how we perform our work. And what this means is, how are we going to produce things? How do we act on a day-to-day basis? How do we prioritize these litany of tasks in front of us? And we asked about corresponding a little bit ago, and we're going to come back to that and what that might mean. How do we use the technologies that are in front of us? On the right is a work persona, and it's something that Work and People Analytics uses to capture the essence of the behaviors of teams so that an organization can very swiftly look at that and determine whether or not they're capable of achieving their goals or achieving their strategic initiatives. And we're going to share that with you a little bit later in the program as well. So what are we talking about when we're talking about behaviors? We're not talking about job descriptions. We're not talking about individual tasks. We all know that people have to create a report for a client, or that we have to engineer a new idea into production. But the question is, how do we go about doing that? And it's these things: mobility, activities, collaboration, networks, technologies, and all on a relative scale of how we do those. So is it a lot of mobility or very little mobility? Do we collaborate with a lot of people when we work on these projects or ideas? Or do we really just do them solo and use all of our own skills and expertise? It's important to understand this because these are the things that give us the clue to understand what's really going to help us in terms of achieving our strategic initiatives. Behaviors are so important, and here are the primary reasons why. Behaviors are fast. Behaviors are exponential, agile, and efficient. When it comes to behaviors, the reasons that behaviors are so fast is behaviors are instantly recognizable as good or bad, as helpful or hurtful. We can see this when we raise our own children, when we work with each other. We instantly recognize that's not a good behavior, so we need to correct that. Because of that, it becomes actionable. And it becomes actionable, for example, on the very next day. If we know that our teams, for example, aren't collaborating, when we really need them to collaborate, to share information, ideas, and build new innovative products and services, the very next day we can coach in simple one-on-one settings or simply in a meeting or other areas where we communicate. That's what makes these things very fast. It's exponential. When we take away a bad behavior, we immediately take that energy away from that bad behavior, and it can go to the right kinds of behaviors. That's exponential because you're reducing the cost or the waste, and you're also moving it to the energy towards something that's going to be much more productive, sustainable, and successful for the organization. And we also all know, and we have from experience, when we are looking at behaviors of others in the organization or other teams that we feel aren't functioning as well as we may want them to function, it's exponential when they do, because everybody gets the message and we all say, oh, this is terrific. Everyone's on the same page. Agility is extraordinarily important in today. And when we know behaviors, when we walk around and know the behaviors of our team and who we are at our core, it's very easy to switch when a brand new directive comes in because the world and the marketplace has changed. It's very easy for us to say, well, here's who we are. So in order to respond to this, this is how now we have to react. We have an excellent starting point. And of course, behaviors are efficient. You don't have to manage behaviors, you coach behaviors. An example is this. When we're talking about producing a new product or a service within an organization, if we know how we're behaving, we can coach those behaviors. We know that our team is ready for and can act to and respond to that initiative that's been requested. However, if we're not sure, what we normally do is we get them together. We spend time logging how we're going to do this. We tell them how we're going to do that. We join them in many multiples of meetings, and we try and manage the entire process. This, by effectively managing behaviors and paying attention to them, we can reduce the hierarchy in our organization, thus making people extraordinarily happy and successful, which is what we all want.
So, Kevin, before you move on, if I could interject, I think what you're saying is understanding behaviors and work activities provides evidence for leadership to make the changes that they require in order to achieve their strategies. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. It's important to understand that because it increases, it's the evidence that makes the decisions move swiftly. The decision making becomes easy when you see something in front of you and understand what it is. So I'm going to walk through a couple of case studies here that amplify or show examples and specific behaviors and how they related to the strategies of those organizations. So the first one we're going to talk about is increasing innovation. Organization and their ability and capability and desire to increase innovation within that organization. They need to do that in order to sustain itself and grow. They have to continue to develop new products and services, ways of delivering value to clients. So understanding that as the strategic intent and strategic initiative of the organization, when we look and start to understand what our work activities and priorities are of the organization, we can very quickly see what the top priorities are, denoted by the dark blue, as well as the volume of hours and energy that is put to those types of activities on a week-to-week basis In this particular case, corresponding and administrating, we were quite surprised to find out that those are the top priorities. What that immediately indicates is that if those are the primary initiatives, those are not innovative type initiatives. We're not working on things that are going to create new products and services by sharing ideas, testing and trying, designing, and brainstorming what we can do to serve clients.
I'd comment, Kevin, that they're not unlike the rest of us. The answer to the poll question that we launched at the beginning of the presentation, 92% of our audience voted, and more than 50% spent more than a third of their time per week corresponding in some way, shape, or form.
And that represents a real opportunity for organizations nowadays. It's how we use technology to increase the human experience and allow humans to interact in the way that they need to interact to share information. Because most of our technologies and anything that we can make transactional can be mechanized quite quickly within the process of an organization, creating outputs that have great quality control around them. But what we really need to be able to do is increase that human interaction. But that human interaction has to be more than just telling and corresponding. That human interaction has to be sharing of knowledge, of skills, and creating that dialogue and that interplay between everyone. What's also important is the volume here, and this relates to what is often referred to as the ROI, or the return on investment. If you look at the activities of this organization, it really represents $1.6 million annually in compensation. So it's very easy to start to establish what an ROI is when using training programs, learning and development, workplace strategies, or different technologies to increase or decrease certain components, such as the administrative tasks or the corresponding. Now on the next slide, what I'm going to share is these same exact activities that are laid out on a dynamic two-dimensional matrix, which really measures how they do those activities. How much do they collaborate on them, and how complex are these activities? And when you do that, you really break down into these four primary quadrants of where work is being deployed and what these behaviors are. Are these project type behaviors, innovative, administrative, or is it expertise at play? And you can see we noted in the middle the administrative and corresponding hours. So the organization itself is working very administratively or transactionally, but the innovation in the upper right-hand corner isn't given the attention that it needs. So from a decision-making standpoint, the organization can see very clearly that they need to move some of that energy, the living, breathing parts of the organization, out of the administrative quadrant and into that innovative quadrant.
So visually, you can begin to see that the work activities and the behaviors that they're engaged in as a whole organization, or even department by department, may not be in line with the strategic initiatives that they're trying to attain.
Right, and I think it amplifies something. A recent research revealed that 94%, and this is astonishing, I think, to everyone, of leaders, 94% are dissatisfied with their company's pace of innovation. And it's because we're focused on so many tactical things on a day-to-day basis, which we can use different systems and ways to remove that energy and move that toward the things that humans are great at, which is innovation. So what did this organization do? The solutions relate now to how can we use technology, because when work and people analytics data was used, we were very quickly able to look at and corroborate to the types of technologies that they were using, which really are not up to date or sufficient enough to create innovation, to create efficiency in how they're working. So the technology ROI, to be able to use things, for example, such as iPads or mobile phone applications or even laptops, is now very clear what that can serve back to the organization. The leadership itself can become very involved and lead innovation. And workplace strategy has an awful lot to do with this as well. How do you co-locate people or allow seamless interactions among organizations so they can get the work done they need to do, but interact and innovate and see how they can serve clients, because it takes an intense amount of listening. The results of those are really cost reduction and positive net turnover, because now the people have left that you don't want in the organization and that aren't contributing in the right way because they say, hey, this might not quite be the place for me. And the people that are there and that are attracted now to the organization, and attraction and retention is so difficult nowadays, now see very clearly what this organization is all about and what it needs: revenue growth and new markets. The next case I want to share relates specifically to leadership transition and building an intense learning atmosphere in the organization to build a high performance culture. And I'm going to share the following 3 slides here, which are going to show how this organization saw how it needed to change itself strategically, its behaviors, in order to achieve the strategy of transitioning their leadership and building a learning culture. The first data point that we looked at with the organization with work and people analytics data, which was swiftly gathered, is where do we work? And this is fairly astonishing when you talk about an organization that's trying to promote learning and a leadership team that's trying to move all of their knowledge and their capabilities about how the organization works and what it's valued and what it values to everyone else in the organization. Everyone's working in their siloed areas, in their offices, in their fixed places. They're not moving around. And if you saw how the organization worked, you would be able to see that they are all very boxed up in private offices. Now, we're not here to suggest that workplace strategy is the answer to everything, but in this particular case, it played a big part in how the organization was going to be able to succeed. Then we looked at their work priorities. And while they're doing sharing knowledge and skills and coaching, and they're trying to acquire knowledge, what they aren't doing is prioritizing this. The light blue indicates that, yeah, we're doing this, but we really don't think it's a high priority. And that's critically important, because across all different demographics, whether it was executive teams, management teams, staff levels, this was very similar. And the reason that we found out very swiftly, why is this not important? It's because they said that the culture of that organization was not a learning culture. In fact, they thought when they were sharing knowledge or skills or coaching each other, they were causing noise, friction, and disturbing other people in the organization. This was a tremendous eye-opener for the executive team. Finally, the third data point among several data points that I'm sharing here is how was that leadership team working and what did they do? And we can see here what their capital is at play in the organization. Highly productive capital, but very little innovative and especially intellectual and social capital. And these were the things that the leaders in this organization really wanted to focus on, was how to share knowledge, how to share skills, to listen to the next level of leaders, and to interact with them to show them the way. They clearly were not doing this. And quite frankly, when they saw this and saw how they were working as a team, it immediately cemented in them the decision-making process about changing how they needed to work in the organization. And here's the solutions that came out of assessing these behaviors. They knew they needed to change the organizational structure, make it much less hierarchical, make it much more interactive and integrated. They knew that they needed training on how to communicate, and that was primarily to be able to tell everyone, it's good to communicate, we need to work together, we need to work as teams. And the third thing, as I mentioned earlier, is they implemented a workplace strategy. And let me talk about that for a second when we talk about the money. The behaviors data revealed to them that they had over in the coming decade, $10 million of savings staring them in the face if they changed the behaviors specifically related to their work activities that they were doing. And when they saw that they had that, it was nothing for them to say, let's spend $3 million on completely renovating and changing our workplace so that it facilitates how everyone works within the organization. Those 3 things were very important and cemented in them the decision. And the result then was the cost reduction, the talent attraction, because they've redesigned themselves, that's very attractive and now speaks to who they are. And they became one of the top 5 in their markets in the country. And the entire organization was energized for the transition of leadership. Not scared in the least, but happy and looking forward to it. Very successful organization and continues to be extraordinarily successful because of that. Strategies accomplished. So let's talk about the behaviors and the direct impact and that value. Why do behaviors matter? Because behaviors point directly to the barriers in the organization, and this is what everyone wants to know, what's in our way. They're tied directly to the income statement and balance sheet. In my history as a CPA, working in public accounting and working in financial director positions with the companies that I worked with, we're always looking for what creates the income statement and balance sheet. Numbers, behaviors create them. And behaviors are even more important than what's on the income statement, because the income statement and the profit and loss show you where you've been, but the behaviors are going to predict where you are going to be in the future. Behaviors are measurable. We need to understand that these behaviors are measurable period upon period. This is where we attract, and this is where we can show the ROI. We can see how we've changed behaviors over a period of time when we implement a learning program, when we create a workplace strategy or introduce a new technology or make changes in staff. We can measure these and we can understand what our progress is and we can monetize it. As we said earlier, it's exponential. We're removing waste, which makes everyone feel better in the organization. This is what makes organizations happy, and it focuses our investment forward. Very similarly, bad behaviors are a drag on our culture. Tasks require management, heavy management, and behaviors require coaching. We should be managing machines now. Machines can do everything that we need them to do. We can mechanize those things. What we need is to coach our people so that our people can be very nimble on a day-to-day basis and do the things we need them to do. And finally, behaviors are very human. When we coach and talk about behaviors to our teams, we create growth in those teams and we create their development, so it's exponential there. With that, we're going to ask one more poll question here before we close out. And Stephen's going to deliver that poll question out, and it is about engagement.
I'll just add that's a very simple question. Have you or your organization used in the past, or are you currently using engagement or satisfaction surveys? We're talking specifically about behaviors. That's a little bit different. I know you're going to comment on that, Kevin.
Right.
I'd also say we've got just a few minutes left, and I know we wanted to keep this short, so we'll be closing that poll pretty soon. And I noticed an early question, so maybe you can come back to me in a moment, and then I'll ask Stephen if there are any others from the audience.
Right.
So Stephen, maybe you can close that poll question now if you've got some response.
Thank you, Stephen. It looks like much more than half have been involved in engagement surveys. It's very popular nowadays, and here's what we want to say about engagement. Because Stephen, in his work as an industrial organizational psychologist, has noted that around the country and around the world, these engagement scores and satisfaction scores are really not changing very much, and in any organization. And it really needs, the question needs to be asked, are these really outcomes, or are these what we should be working on? And I think it points directly back to the things that we need to be working on, which is the behaviors in the organization. Because once we can accomplish working on the right behaviors, those engagement scores go up because people are satisfied, they understand the direction of the organization, and they're happy with their job and what's expected of them. It's very important to establishing how they work and reconciling that back to those strategies. I put up on the screen, and Tom, you want to talk real quick about those last couple of questions, but I put up on the screen that work persona, and we're going to deliver this to everybody that is on the webinar today. And what this is, and it's fillable, just look at each of those aspects and say, hey, how do we work, where do we work, those work activities, and look at a team that you are responsible for or the entire organization, and try and capture on your own what behaviors you use when you're working in the organization. Then ask yourself that simple question, hey, are these the things we need to be working on? Are these our behaviors that we should have in order to achieve what we need to do in the organization? Tom.
Yeah, Kevin, just a comment about that before I get to that first question. WPA's Work and People Analytics platform is really a robust toolbox in the cloud, as we mentioned earlier, and it brings together multiple models. You've shown a couple of them in this presentation, but the very visual and very interactive and very demisable picture that a leadership team can get of its organization provides them really deep insight so that they can have true evidence for decision making and transformational change. It's, as you were saying earlier, it's what exactly are we doing so that we know where to apply resources and what kind of decisions to make. And that's not a bad segue to the question that I saw earlier from Bob, who asked, how does WPA collect this data from an organization?
That's a great question. And WPA, Work and People Analytics, gathers that information from the entire population. So the entire population is responding about what their priorities are, their relationships, and how they do their work. And that comes from a lot of research that says that's the one thing that you need to ask and understand from knowledge workers is how they do their job, because it's the one thing managers don't know and leaders don't know. But we have to be careful about not asking about wants and desires, but asking about how they do their work. Good question. Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, Kevin, you and I have used the term psychological safety from time to time. Maybe you could comment on that.
Psychological safety means that people in the organization are very quick to respond because they feel safe. And the one thing that people feel safe talking about is not their wants and desires. That puts them in a position where they feel someone may be looking at that. But what they're very happy to share is how they work, because no one knows that better than them. And that creates psychological safety. So our response rate is extraordinarily high, 80, 90% for most organizations. And Tom, I think that's what we have. We invite everyone to join us next month. We're going to talk about that mobility model that you saw earlier, and we're going to really get into the nuts and bolts of that mobility model and where the money and opportunity lie within that model. But thank you very much to everyone for participating with us today. And remember that in our advanced economy is really the biggest point of differentiation, and the way to win is how my 100 people can outwork your 100 people. And that relates specifically to behaviors in the organization. Thank you very much to everybody.
Yeah, very well said. I would just remind everyone that after you close the GoToWebinar window, we really would appreciate your feedback on a 2-question survey about today's webinar. And we're actually asking about future topics that may be of interest to you, so please give us a comment if you can. We really appreciate you making time to attend, and just in our promise to keep this very, very short, I think we'll sign off, and appreciate you joining us. Thanks for the presentation, Kevin.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.